Representative Michael Waltz of Florida. Good morning, Congressman. Good to have you.
Hey, good to be on with you, Hugh.
I always disclose to people my son works in your office, and then I can go to the news. Yesterday, you broke on Fox News the idea that you would like the United States to boycott the Winter Olympics in 2022 in China. How's the reaction been to that proposal? Why did you make it?
Well, to be clear, we're actually asking the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, to move the games out of China. Actually, Senator Rick Scott has been asking that for over a year. Speaker Newt Gingrich mentioned it about a year ago. But since they have refused, the International Olympic Community is not abiding by its own moral and ethical standards. We are calling for a boycott. I cannot see how, after the Chinese Communist Party has unleashed the coronavirus on the world, it covered it up, arrested journalists, arrested doctors, obfuscated an investigation by the WHO, and now is actively committing genocide, forced rape, forced sterilization, slave labor in concentration camps, literally as we speak. How do we then have the American flag flying in Beijing? How do we bestow the honor of hosting the Olympics on such a brutal authoritarian dictatorship? And how do we give Xi and his cronies in Beijing the platform of the Olympics to espouse their form of government? Hugh, you've covered this a lot. You know that Xi is actively working to replace the American dream with the China dream around the world. And the Olympics just bestows on him legitimacy for his authoritarian regime. We need to, and the Biden administration needs to walk the walk when it comes to human rights and when it comes to holding China accountable. Enough is enough. We need to pull our athletes back unless the IOC moves the games to another country.
Now, Congressman Waltz, I asked David Drucker in the first hour, Byron York, and Admiral Stavridis in the second hour about the Waltz option, the boycott option. And all three of them instantly went to 1980. And they correctly remember, you're too young, but I remember, we were so disappointed. The athletes were so screwed. They all three went right immediately back to 1980. And different situation, different world, and our economies are differently structured right now. Have you heard a lot of that since you introduced the resolution that the Waltz option will unfairly punish athletes who've trained all their lives?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, a lot of people go back to that, and that's somewhat understandable, but a very different dynamic, I think. One, you don't have and didn't have necessarily an active genocide going on. I mean, we are literally talking about millions of people in concentration camps, images that have leaked out of China of the Uyghurs on their knees, blindfolded, being loaded into rail cars, loaded into trains, and then being stripped of all of their personal belongings and their heads shaved as they enter these concentration camps for re-education, to be followed by forced sterilization and forced rape. So I think America needs to wake up, and I would encourage Admiral Stavridis, who I have a lot of respect for, and others, to understand the gravity of what's going on, not to mention the over 2 million people that are dead around the world for what Beijing has released and then covered up. So I think there's a magnitude of difference here, and I just can't see then rewarding them literally 11 months from now with an Olympic Games. And then separately, Hugh, let's talk about the financial benefits, that the billions that will pour into Beijing, and all of the multinational companies, NBC, Adidas, Nike, Apple, that the sponsors that stand to make billions, off of the backs of the slave labor and off of the backs of this genocide. So, enough talk. It's time to walk the walk. Social justice doesn't just apply to, U.S. borders. All of these companies talk about responsible social governance. Well, let's see them step up, and let's see them make a tough stand when it comes to their bottom line.
To be clear, Admiral Stavridis is not opposed to it necessarily. He said, try and get an alliance to move the Olympics as the preferred option. And I said, well, Rick Scott's been trying to do that. But here's the follow-up. You're right that Democrats have talked the human rights line, and Secretary of State Blinken said the genocide is real, so they're kind of on the record. We have a minute left. What about the cancel culture that operates in the United States, ought it not to operate with at least as much force against the sponsors of the Olympics to get them out of the business of happy-faced China advertising when genocide is underway?
Well, yeah, and I would just add 180. I mean, that's a huge number. 180 international human rights organizations have also called for the games to be moved. And I want to be clear, that is absolutely the preferred option. I want our athletes and the world's athletes to be able to compete. But I just don't see how many of these athletes themselves, many of them who have called for social justice, can do so literally in a country where genocide is active and ongoing as we speak. And to talk about cancel culture, I mean, look at the hypocrisy of the NBA, right, where they have backed so many social justice movements here in the United States. But when one coach in Houston says, "I stand with freedom in Hong Kong," they almost fire the guy until he deletes his tweet. Because
it's a complete.
So much
we will
money,
look for
so
Democratic co-sponsors, Congressman. I hope you get a lot of them. Come back and update us next week. Michael Waltz from Florida.